this CNN town hall. It is supposedly there is a lot of internal strife at CNN about this. Here's Anderson Cooper explaining why we needed to have the town hall that we saw.
Many of you have expressed deep anger and disappointment. Many of you are upset that someone who attempted to destroy our democracy was invited to sit on a stage in front of a crowd of Republican voters to answer questions and predictably continued to spew lie after lie after lie. And I get it. It was disturbing. It was disturbing to see and hear that person refer to a black law enforcement officer as a thug, an adjective he used many times to describe black men, and call Caitlin Collins, the moderator, nasty, which is what he calls any woman who stands up to him. It was disturbing to hear him speak so highly of QAnon conspirators and insurrectionists who assaulted police officers in our democracy on January 6th. And it was awful to hear him spread ridiculous lies about the election. And it was certainly disturbing to hear that audience, young and old, our fellow citizens, people who love their kids and go to church, laugh and applaud his lies and his continued defamation of a woman who, according to a jury of his peers, he sexually abused and defamed. As good a job as Caitlin Collins did trying to fact check him, it is impossible to fact check fully because he lies so shamelessly. Now, many of you think CNN shouldn't have given him any platform to speak, and I understand the anger about that. Giving him the audience, the time, I get that. But this is what I also get. The man you were so disturbed to see and hear from last night, that man is the front runner for the Republican nomination for president. And according to polling, no other Republican is even close. That man you were so upset to hear from last night, he may be president of the United States in less than 2 years. And that audience that upset you, that's a sampling of about half the country. They are your family members, your neighbors, and they are voting. And many said they're voting for him. Now, maybe you haven't been paying attention to him since he left office. Maybe you've been enjoying not hearing from him, thinking it can't happen again. Some investigation is going to stop him. Well, it hasn't so far. So if last night showed anything, it showed it can happen again. It is happening again. He hasn't changed, and he is running hard. You have every right to be outraged today and angry and never watch this network again. But do you think staying in your silo and only listening to people you agree with is going to make that person go away?
This is there's a lot of like bait and switch going on in this, it seems to me. But Heather, give me your take on what was wrong with it. Why do you, let me ask you it this way. Why do you want to stay in your silo and not hear from anybody else?
Well, I don't actually think that's true, that I want to stay in my silo, nor do I stay in my silo. And I don't think that the people who are objecting to that event are staying in their silo. That's just a straw man. And, you know, they're putting that out there as a way of sort of shaming us into thinking, well, you know, we don't want to hear from Donald Trump. We all, you know, we know what Donald Trump is, and they know what Donald Trump is. Now, let me just take one piece of what he just said. He said he's the front runner, and whether you like it or not. Well, you know, there was a time when Herman Cain was the front runner, when Ben Carson was the front runner. I don't recall them doing one-on-one town halls with any of those guys. So that's not a reasonable excuse. Now, it is true he's the front runner and he's probably going to be the nominee, but it's May of 2023. It's not May of 2024. What they basically did was offer him a kickoff rally on national TV for his presidential campaign. And by the way, they know that's what they were doing. And they absolutely understood that this was a big ratings grabber. And when you see the comments that Chris Lick, the new CEO, said the next day, you know, we made news. And, you know, I don't know, cable networks aren't supposed to make news. They're just supposed to report news. And the fact that this was an event designed to kind of put CNN at the middle of the story says everything about what they were doing. Now, you know, we all know what Donald Trump is. There is some value, I suppose, maybe in showing Donald Trump to people who may have, as Cooper says, forgotten what he was like. There probably are people who've just tuned him out and said, you know, I don't ever want to see that guy again. And maybe they need to see him, but they didn't need to see him in that particular format.
Right.
That format is absolutely conducive to Donald Trump, which was demonstrated. We know what he is. He's a pathological liar. It was a tsunami of lies, just one right after the other, obfuscation, dissembling, whatever you want to call it. It was just nothing but typical Donald Trump bullshit. And everybody knew that was what it was going to be. And Caitlin Collins obviously had spent a tremendous amount of time preparing with these answers, with these, these challenges that she was going to throw at him as he was spewing that tsunami of lies. And they had to have known that that was not going to work, because it never has worked and it never will work. And then they went beyond that, and they stacked the audience with Trump cultists, apparently, who they also knew were going to provide a laugh track, basically, for this television show that they were putting on, this entertainment spectacle. They knew they would elicit no real information, although we gleaned a few nuggets from what he said, some of the things maybe some people hadn't heard before. But the fact is that when you put Donald Trump on live in a situation like that with an audience of hand-picked, there were a lot of his own operatives in the audience there, apparently, that, you have this hand-picked, Donald Trump cult, and you put him on live, you might as well be covering a rally. I don't care. You can call it a town hall. You can call it whatever. It was a Trump rally, and that elicits no useful information whatsoever in a live format. In a taped format, you might have been able to go back and put together, the challenges in the moment, provide context, do a lot of things that would be useful to viewers. But that particular format is absolutely deadly, and Donald Trump knows it, and that's why he wanted it, and that's why they're celebrating today. They're putting out T-shirts that say TNN, Trump News Network, with his picture on it. Seriously. So good work, CNN. That really worked out for you. That's really good.
I think it probably did work out for CNN. They're just looking for the ratings bump. But putting that aside, I think that's exactly the point. And you can tell, in the way that Anderson Cooper, your point being that this was a format problem, and it's one thing to cover a Trump rally. It's another to give it the veneer of there being conflict, the veneer of there being some type of questioning. And apparently, Josh Marshall pointed out in Tara Palmieri's Puck newsletter that not quite sure who she was interviewing, but they did some warm up with the audience ahead of time. One of the questions were, are there any conditions? And Caitlin said, no, there are no conditions. Someone asked if Trump knew the questions ahead of time. She said he didn't. And I think a lot of people were prepared to ask questions. The floor manager came out ahead of time and said, please do not boo. Please be respectful. You were allowed to applaud. I think they set this tone where they were going to try their best to keep this between the navigate. In other words, this was a setup to be a rally, but with the veneer of there actually being an interview. And I think, look, there is no problem in my mind with CNN having him on and interviewing him in the way that they would a candidate. But this was crazy. And he said, there's many of you who wouldn't want him on any platform. Well, the fact of the matter is that it does make a difference how you platform this guy. Then, yeah, of course, he is probably going to be the Republican nominee. So you ask him questions, you don't give him the opportunity to do even rallies are staged events. This is even more staged because it appears to be something else.
Exactly. It was it's like a pageant that they were putting on. Let's have it's like a setup for a reality TV show, which of course is his milieu. And that is actually, it's incredibly important that people know what Donald Trump is saying. I don't deny that. And I'm not a person who says, don't ever talk about him or retweet him. All he wants is attention. Well, we can't help it. And Cooper's, right to the extent that the Republican Party still seems to love this guy, and he is probably going to be the nominee, and you have to hear from him. But he is sui generis. This is not a normal candidate. Even if you put Ron DeSantis or some other right-wing freak in that situation, it would be different than it is with Donald Trump. And it's because of the massive amount of lying and the absolute, the overwhelming epic amount of scandals that this guy is dealing with and has dealt with throughout his and bizarre ideas and ignorance that he spews. He is different than other candidates, and I thought they had learned this. I wrote this in my piece in Salon today. During the Trump years, I mean, we watched this happen in 2016. It's basically a rerun of 2016, the same stuff, except Trump has more power now than he did then. And, we watched them, oh, look, he became president today, and we went through all that. But over time, the mainstream media made an adjustment, and they learned how to call it. They started saying it was lies. They called it the big lie, which, by the way, CNN prohibits them from saying now. They can't call it the big lie anymore. But they had learned how to cover Donald Trump in an objective way, and by objective, by a neutral way, if that's what you want. The only way that you can cover him is by covering the fact that he is batshit insane, and so is his party. That is the reality that we're dealing with. You cannot sit there and say that, well, he's just, it's just one side, both sides, or he said, she said, or whatever. You can't, because we know what he is. I mean, this is a guy who told people to drink bleach during a pandemic. I mean, this is not someone who is normal, and they knew that. I mean, they absolutely had come to some kind of reckoning with that particular fact. And by the end of the Trump years, and if you look at the post-election period and January 6th and the rest, the mainstream media did a reasonably good job. I'm not trying to extol them as being great in every way, but in this particular way, they had learned something. Here we are, we're back at square one, where should we put Donald Trump on unfiltered for hours on end? Should we just let him do that and just sort of spew his nonsense all over the place? And that is, we haven't talked about this, but it's a hugely important part of the story. There's a reason that this is happening at CNN. And the reason it's happening is because they had a corporate takeover by a guy, the major shareholder of the new corporate structure, the board of directors, is a guy named John Malone, who's a pay TV pioneer. And he is a right-wing fanatic. He gives Rupert Murdoch a run for his money. And by the way, at one point, he owned so much, News Corp stock that Rupert was afraid Malone was going to take it over, and ended up kind of squeezing him out on some kind of a corporate power play. Malone is Rupert Murdoch. He has been out there saying, you know what I'd really like? I want CNN to be more like Fox News, which does more of a news thing, and then they have equally balanced opinions at another point. I mean, he said this, not verbatim, but that's what he said. And his flunkies, including Chris Lick, the CEO, are following the edicts of a Rupert Murdoch of CNN. That's basically what's happening. So this was definitely on Wednesday night a play for disaffected Fox viewers, a play for ratings. And, this is what, I find it astonishing, because look at what it did to Fox News. It just cost them $787 million just a couple of weeks ago, because they were so enamored of this Fox News audience that they had created. The monster, Monster had taken over the network, the monster they created, that they ended up having to pay out a huge sum of money and are suffering anyway because of it. They're still losing people. So this is a very, very, we're seeing this right-wing takeover of another part of our media landscape, and it's depressing as hell, because that's the last thing we need. I mean, I don't know how many networks these people need, but they've got Fox, they've got Newsmax, they've got OAN, and now they're gunning for CNN. I guess what else? I guess MSNBC will be the lone island out there that isn't a far-right network. I guess
right. I mean, it's just full of Republican operatives during almost like 3/4 of the day. But putting that aside for a moment, there's two different things that seem to be going on here in terms of like the coverage of Trump and just the coverage in general that we're seeing. One is that we have this real like sort of ideological push, or I should say, conservative ideology push. We've always had, I think, a very sort of corporate friendly ideology that has permeated all of the cable networks at all times. you've got this thing with Malone, and from New York, we know him from back I think he was like MSG, like he was into cable back in New York for a long
years
time.
and years and years ago, yeah.
And we have this thing, with Twitter and Elon Musk, and now maybe Carlson. We can talk about that in a moment. But there's also, I mean, you and I were talking about this during the Trump years. Like, are they going to revert to the mean? And on some level, they are.